Hey, this is an addendum to this Friday night's or video because someone was asking me for an example. An example of this video that I did on noise saturation and distortion is very difficult, and I'll explain to you why. Because first of all, the first thing you need to do is understand the concepts, which means you need to get a tone generator on a track and you need to start messing around with your saturations, your noises, and your distortions to see what it's doing to your sound. Sometimes with noise files, you really need a sound to work with to hear what it's doing. But it really is going to be an experimentation on your part. Why I used a sinusoid is because you would have very much not even hardly been able to see what was going on if I would have used actual sound foil like a vocal or something like that. You wouldn't have been. I mean, sometimes you can't really see it. To where if I put mild saturation on a vocal, it's going to be very hard for you to see what's happening on a video. And I don't want to spend the time making a bunch of files and then, but I'm messing with all that right now. I put this channel together to try to relate concepts and try to get you experimenting in your studio so you can hear what's happening. You get an idea of the concept and you're showed the concept and then you start experimenting so you can see what it does to what's going on. So, and I can send you the presets that I have for my trash too, so that you can use them if you would like. But, you basically have to experiment this with your own. It's a really good idea to experiment with a sinusoid on a tone generator and then start experimenting with different sounds, different instruments, different patches, different samples, different captures and things like that, because it's going to be very different between even a male vocalist and a female vocalist, what you do. And with the noise files, hearing the difference between what type of noise files are going to act on different types of sounds or samples or vocalists is very different. And sometimes you might even have to combine them to get a noise type of saturation that's going to work well with whatever you're working on. So, basically it comes down to you experimenting and hearing it yourself and working with stuff in your own studio. Now, with that being said, that also you really have to take into consideration of some type of workflow. Now, this can be very difficult because sometimes you get a vocal or an instrument that you don't want to mess with at all and think that you need to sound sculpt on it and make a mess out of it. Whereas sometimes it's very little and you've got to really search around what's missing. A little bit of noise, or is there just a little bit of saturation missing, or is there a little bit of odd harmonics missing and nothing else? What's going on there? And you can run into problems like you added a little bit of even harmonics, which took care of one problem but caused a different problem that you have to equalize out. It's like it took care of a problem at 500 hertz that you were having with that sound or that sample or that capture, but then it caused a problem in the high end that you're hearing, so you go back and got to EQ that a little bit to fix that problem. So you can be jumping around, and also you can get to certain areas. You can do noise files, and then you do some type of the saturation, then you might get to even on harmonics, and then you might have to go back and adjust the noise file, or you might decide now you have to use a different type of noise file because of what you're doing with harmonics. It can be a lot of bouncing around and experimentation until you really understand what's happening and start to work well with it and know what you're doing with it, just like equalization. I've seen people that fight with equalization for years because they just can't get the basic concept through their head, what the hell to do with the damn thing, so they just don't make a mess out of their own crap and get frustrated and mad and throw their, DAW in the garbage can. So, I'll just show you a really simple workflow that I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible and quick as possible so that you can start experimenting with it. Normally, in my editing phase, I'll go through and I do subtractive EQ, high pass, low pass filter, and a little bit of subtractive EQ around to clean it up. And then I'll normally do my sound sculpting before my equalization because I know what I'm looking for, but this is a good way for you to start until you really get comfortable with what you're doing. So then I'll equalize it. On this one, I'm really using the equal loudness contour. I've got presets for aggressive, milder, 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 and milder settings of the equal loudness contour because I find that works really good for vocals. And then sometimes I might have to come in here and put another node and push up a little bit here. I might have to push that one up just a little bit more, or subtract down a little bit more, or something like that, and fuss around with it until I get it to where it sounds as good as possible. Then I'll go through and do subtractive EQ again. I'll low pass and high pass filter it and go look for problem notch, subtractive EQ work until I'm really happy that's about as good as I'm going to be able to get that sounding. All right. Then after that, I'm going through with these noise files And I've got this noise file, right? I'm starting out with brown noise. I think brown noise is going to work really good. So I've gone up here and I've seen this is 0 dB line here on this file. But I've taken this and I've moved this line down to 0 crossing on this wave file so that I can draw automation on the levels. So then I'll go through here like this. You can spend a lot more time doing this and do a much better job, but I just want to give you an example. So let's say I've done this like this all the way across this wave file. Back down to 0 crossing, okay? So then basically what I want to do is I want to come through here. I always have to have a node here before I start that copies it well. Command copy, go down to here to this noise file, command paste that automation. So let's go here and let's just cut this off here, right there. And oops, let's go to here. Let's cut off this automation for a little bit, and then we're going to cut that there, delete that. We're going to go over to here and we're going to delete that so we can just kind of see where this automation was. Right, so then I'll go back to here, this file up here, and I'll remove that automation so it's back at 0 dB here. And then this right here, this is basically 0 and it's down at -5 or something on here, but don't worry about that because basically what you're going to want to do is highlight that. If I expand this a little bit, and you're going to want to drop this way down and start bringing it up into it until you're getting this, the noise is saturating the sound as well as possible. Normally I see saturation, distortion, and noise are a combination of things before adding even on harmonics and things like that, because that's how normally most people perceive saturation. But since you've got them separated in this process to do a much better job, much precise job, they're one step at a time. First noise and then saturation. So now bring that up in there to where I like it. It's like right there, I like it. Sometimes I might have to change noise files or combine a couple noise files to really get the type of noise that I want that's really doing a good job of helping whatever this capture is sound good. And then I'll go through here and I'll add basically on the, I have to add a plugin on my DAW here so before it'll render to audio. I want to go here and I want to transfer this rendered audio. That way it will render all this volume automation onto this wave file, onto this noise file. Now at this point you can do a couple different things. You can either bus these two tracks to a bus and deal with them like a group of guitars or something like that, or you can combine them, which means you can just drag this file up on top of there, command bounce, and now it's just like you mix that noise and that capture together. They're mixed together just like you mixed them together. You have to make your own decision on what workflow there works better for you. And then basically after that you start going in and adding your saturation. So if you remember, I showed you all this in the last video, so you just kind of go through there and look at it. And there's a link on my channel that goes to a calculation site that you can look up harmonics to really understand even and odd harmonics and things like that. So I'll go through here and add, I've got this looped in some area, and I'm going to go and start adding saturation. I'm going to really listen to what it's doing. Sometimes it can be a lot, sometimes it can be very little, sometimes you'll decide none. Does that make sense? And you're just going to kind of start bringing it in. You might want to change the aggressiveness over here or something like that, but it basically is that simple. So now you've combined the saturation and the noise, which most of the time is viewed as saturation, the combination of those two, but you're doing a much more accurate and fine-tuned approach of implementing that into your capture to do work on it and sound sculpt it. Then after that, I'll go to the next plugin. I've got these in series, and I'll normally go to, there's a couple different things. Odd harmonics are normally more musical. Even harmonics aren't, they're a little harsher. Even in odd harmonics combinations will add a much finer distortion like a cello or something like that, that really smooth distortion. Can work really good for somebody who's doing like baby R&B, bro. You know what I'm saying? Or something like that. So, I'll start out with even odd harmonics or odd harmonics and see what that's doing. And then sometimes I'll jump to like odd harmonics and I'll add that to it. Sometimes I'll add odd harmonics, even and odd harmonics, and odd even harmonics separately with a different plugin in series. Does that make sense? But I'll do that next. So then I'm adding those in just like I showed you with the saturation to hear what it's doing, which ones are actually doing a good job, if it's causing the audio problems or if it's actually helping in some areas, and Then I'll go to like square clipping, and we talked about that in the last video. You want to review that and start bringing that really distorted sound up into it to see if that just kind of, sometimes that'll smooth it out some, or add a little bit of grittiness, or add something that's really nice to that voice. Start bringing it up into it there and blending it in there to see if it does a good job and if it's adding some to it. And then you got to take into consideration that sometimes you got to jump back and forth. You might be doing this here and you did the saturation, and then you realized it was taking care of one problem, but it was causing this other problem. So then you had to put an EQ on after that and do a little subtractive EQ because it added some really cool thing up around 500 hertz. It was really making it sound good, but then you were listening and visualizing on your spectrometer that it was causing a problem in the upper frequencies that you didn't want boosted. So you can either deal with it then with a little subtractive EQ, or wait till you get done with this sound sculpting. And that can be at each phase. And sometimes you might jump back all the way to your noise file and say, nope, I got to bring that up a little bit now, because now that I've added those harmonics, now it just needs a little bit more. And yeah, dude, that's so beautiful. Yeah. All right. So, you know, that's a concept. Sometimes you have to jump around whenever you're sound sculpting. Sound sculpting can sometimes be frustrating, because sometimes with each individual sound and each individual vocal or sample or instrument, that it's a job in itself just jumping around and experimenting, trying to get it sound just right. So that you're just going to have to deal with that. That's just a fact of life. So then I'll go back and I'll do this again. I'll do subtractive EQ again, a high and low pass filter, maybe a little subtractive EQ in areas that I see are having problems. And then I'll go and do additive EQ, which means I'll put another EQ on there, and I'll, go through that, and I'll start doing a little bit of additive EQ. I might just have to push up a little bit here, or up just a little bit there, or something like that, and then I'm done. That's it. That basically is the workflow, and it's a good workflow to work through. The concept that's very difficult to relate to is, how do you do that? I can't just tell you that if I pull out a bass drum and say, I'm going to do this workflow and I'm going to add this to it, and that's what you do. Well, that's not obviously going to work the same on a cello, right, bro? And it's certainly not going to work the same on this cool pad you have on your synth, that if you do it exactly that way, it's going to sound like crap, right? So it's going to be different. Different things are going to be added at different levels, different things you're going to have to do to work through to get it to sound as good as possible. That's the biggest thing to relate to you, so that when you're asking for example, that if you can understand that, then you'll start experimenting, because then you're going to approach it, that each time you approach that there's these tools you have. Is it going to work well on that? I'm going to either go, as I get better, I'll start to know that that's going to affect it in a bad way from experience, and or from experimentation of going, no, I've done that on R&B kind of singers before, and I know to add a brown noise mixed with a blue noise a little bit, and normally it makes them sound really good. Does that make sense? And so I'll go to that first and then start doing that. And I'll know not to add even harmonics to that cello, because I know it's going to make it sound like that from experimentation and experience. Does that make sense? That takes time. You just need to experiment with it, and how you might want to do it. You might do it where somebody else might think it's wrong, that the way you might do it on some production to get a cool, unique sound that they wouldn't have, because they're trying to do something else in their production. Does that make sense? So those are the biggest things you need to keep in mind when you're asking for an example of these tools of noise, saturation, and distortion, that it basically going to fall in your lap. Does that make sense? And you can give examples. You can say, well, I've got Bob's vocal here and I want it to sound just like Bob's vocal, and I'm trying to get this vocal to sound like that. And then you could ask for help in those areas, in using noise, saturation, distortion with some experienced people to say, no, I'd try a really soft noise like a brown noise first, or I would, or a combination, and I would try a little bit of odd harmonics, and then maybe an even odd harmonics, a little bit brought up in there, and then a little subtractive EQ there, and then you'd be good to go. So you're asking real direct questions of something that's very defined what you're working on, and to somebody who's experienced in using it. But it's better for you to experiment with them so that you yourself can visualize it and hear it, what's happening with each individual application that you're working with. So Peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next video when we start our series. Our mastering series starts this Friday, from beginning to the end of a well-done production. Peace, hope, love. I'll see you this Friday.